Hey everybody watching on Factor This, I'm Paul Gerke, Content Director of Factor This, on the floor at DISTRIBUTECH 2025 in Dallas, Texas. I'm joined by Arvind Satyam of Pano AI. Arvind, what your company does, I feel like, is so important to the conversations we're having at DISTRIBUTECH right now. For those watching who aren't familiar with what you do, can you give us the 101 and especially share why it's so important in the environment that we're operating in this transmission and distribution space?
Absolutely. Paul, it's great to be here, and I appreciate the interest in this topic. I think we can't go too far these days without hearing wildfire in the news, whether it's in the US or whether it's around the world. And we're seeing intensifying activity, and it's no longer this idea of a wildfire season. We're seeing this across the entire year. What our company does is really try to bring the latest in technology, so whether that be artificial intelligence, ultra-high resolution cameras, to provide that actionable intelligence to fire agencies, utilities, and others that are involved in this space. The thing that's notable, we started 5 years ago. I grew up in Australia. I saw this activity in 2020 when literally the entire country was surrounded by a ring of fire. I live in San Francisco, and we saw a day in San Francisco where the sky turned orange. Subsequently, we saw the activity in Canada. We saw Maui. We saw Smokehouse Creek in Texas, which was in February, or the unfortunate incidents that we saw this year in LA, which started on the second week of January. And I think it's that unpredictability that's one of the things that has been really hard for folks to deal with. And the second thing is we're also seeing mega fires. And so minutes fundamentally matter, and that's really what we're trying to address.
What's in the name, Pano AI? What does that stand for?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. We had a lot of fun trying to think about how we think about the solution, but also how we name it in order to go do this. So, if I think about the overall problem, we heard from many end users. Even before creating the company, we spoke to fire chiefs. We spoke to folks that are in utility operations centers, chief risk officers, and what they told us is, with these incidents, we would love better situational awareness. We would love better visibility. We'd love to know, where is the fire? So where's the location of the fire? What's happening real time? So we can think about, how do we allocate resources more effectively? And so we were gravitating to this idea of panoramic visibility, or full 360-degree visibility. And we wanted to have a name that allowed us to kind of broaden through that. And so that's where the name comes from.
What has the response been from utilities? You spoke a moment ago about how this is becoming a more national problem. Maybe a few years ago you wouldn't be having such a large conversation about wildfires and their impact on the grid.
Yeah, I was at the EEI board meeting a couple of weeks ago in DC, which is made up of the investor-owned utility CEOs, and wildfires is now one of the top 3 topics for the entire industry. And so a couple of years ago, we were thinking 2020, 2021, a lot of the discussion was from the utilities in the western states. California, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, and then we started seeing that shift towards Colorado and Montana and Idaho. But I think in the last 2 years, Paul, this is a conversation that has gone across the industry. So the utility industry is wanting to have tools at their disposal where they're able to understand whether it's a utility-caused incident or whether it's an incident that's caused through natural causes, which is majority of the incidents, where it is relative to their assets, so that they're able to do a whole bunch of proactive measures, allocation of resources, proactively de-energize, and also think about the communities that they serve. Another thing that we heard from utilities is this is not a single entity problem. Utilities are not fighting wildfires, so it's important for utilities to do their part, but it's also important for them to collaborate with first responders and for them to have the actionable intelligence to do this. So I think both of those has demonstrated that you can reduce risk, and that's why it's something that they're all investing in. Now it's become foundational.
Out here at DISTRIBUTECH, it's a great time for big announcements. Do you guys have anything you want to share, or any fresh news this week?
Yeah, so we're in 10 states now in the US, and we just announced our collaboration with APS, Arizona Public Service, to deploy 30 locations in the state of Arizona. We highlighted a number of case studies from last year. So we've been deploying since last year, and we highlighted with the Brady fire, the Prairie fire, the Horton fire, where the AI detected the incident before a 911 call or any other known sources. It provide actionable intelligence, and some of these are 10 plus miles away, where you're able to get eyes on in terms of what's going on. And the first responders, so the state agency involved in response, was able to allocate resources effectively, and APS was able to monitor relative to their grid. So it's already proven to be extremely valuable. We're incredibly excited about that partnership and also doing much more in Arizona going forward.
Now, we can't see into the future, but what you're describing is a situation where a utility might be able to roll a truck before they get a call that they need to roll a truck.
Yeah.
That's pretty profound to think about.
Well, I mean, I think the way we have technology today where you're able to understand the environment, right? We're not suggesting it's going to be precogs from Minority Report where you can predict where the fire is going, but there is some data points that you can back into. So if you know that there's a lot of fuel on the ground, you know that winds are going to pick up. So one of the things that we track is red flag conditions. So these are environments where you're more and more susceptible for incidents when they start for them to take off. So in those situations, what we're providing is visibility not only for when an incident starts, but you're able to survey a broad area. Some of the utilities that we're working with, they're looking at 100 plus locations of these. And remote areas where you may need to send somebody in a truck for 2 hours, you're able to monitor this from the control center, right? So it's the visibility to your environment, it's the visibility to potential risk to your assets, and then when something starts, how do you right-size that response? How do you think about de-energizing? How do you make sure that you send the line crews to the right areas? How do you notify the community in terms of risk?
AI is baked into your name, so obviously it's a part of what you do. From your seat at the table, where do you see artificial intelligence leading us, particularly as it pertains to that resiliency space for grid operators and transmission owners?
Yeah, I mean, I see, we've been seeing AI applied to many domains, right? 5 years ago, you and I were chatting offline about AI. The first board meeting I attended, Paul, in 2020, it was the fall of 2020, and I was introduced as Pano AI. And I can tell you, nobody's
cool
introduced.
Nickname,
I mean, I'm still looking for this guy, Al. But in all seriousness, AI has become such a common part of our discourse today. It doesn't matter who we talk to, AI is here and it's being applied in our day-to-day lives, right? In ways we know, in ways that are just improving the way we live our lives. As I think about this problem, AI is playing an incredible role of being able to detect incidents, in many cases, in remote areas, even before somebody else has seen them, right? So today, through deep learning, and we have a data set of over 1 billion images, we can see smoke on the horizon in conditions all the way from mountainous regions to dry areas. We're deployed in the outback. We're in the Pacific Northwest where we can see smoke where there is fog in the air, there's clouds, there's smoke in the horizon. We also detect heat signatures at night. We also pull in satellite data and apply AI to that. So that's being applied here, but AI can do a lot more around prediction. AI can also do a lot of great things when you tie many different elements together. And I think that's where we're at, where we're playing our role around enhancing situational awareness. But I think what we need to do as an industry is tie many of these things together, right?
Is there a bit of a learning curve for some of these utilities to trust their grid edge data? I bet it's one thing to roll a truck and look at something and say, that's a problem.
Right.
When you're 200 miles away and looking through a computer screen or maybe at some disparate data points and not necessarily anything, in the way you would normally see it, it might be a little tough to trust what you're seeing.
Well, and I think this is where ground truth can really dispel any of that. If you contrast this from what happens as status quo in 99% of situations right now. Somebody calls a fire and says, I see smoke in a given area. Nobody's going to tell you the precise lat long. It's impossible, right? You're on a freeway, you see smoke, you're going to call it in, and it'll be kind of in that general zip code. What we're doing as part of our technology, we have ultra high resolution cameras. We use AI to detect an incident, and then if you're a utility, you're able to use that powerful zoom functionality where you can look 10 miles away and literally see if there's a bird sitting on a line. And so at that point, it's not about trust, you just have real-time data, and that's been a really compelling element of this. And I think that's where we see this kind of situational awareness as foundational for utilities, because in the past where they would have had to rely on somebody going out there and seeing this, we're giving them that data at their fingertips. So this data is being utilized by their grid operations teams, their meteorology teams, their line crews. So depending on what you need to do, you're empowering them with this visibility.
Arvind, before I let you go, DISTRIBUTECH is I don't know, it's a cornucopia of people from all different walks in corners of the energy and power industries. In your travels through this show floor and around the exposition center here in Dallas, has there been a common thread in the conversations you've had with either potential clients or colleagues in this space? Maybe something that people aren't talking about enough that is really knocking on the door right now?
Yeah, I'd say one of the areas that I see increased activity on is around resiliency of the grid, right? We need to think about clean, affordable, reliable power, but the importance of the power industry to what we're doing day to day has tremendously grown. I think about electrification, right? We rely on the grid to charge vehicles. I think about the AI boom, and a lot of that relies on increased demands on the grid. But at the same time, we're seeing shocks to the grid. So this is where resiliency is an important theme. And then underneath that is a range of solutions. What I've seen, compared to the conversations over the last 5 years, a lot of these solutions are maturing. So I think about our industry, we're not doing pilots anymore, right? We have over a dozen utility accounts that we're deployed with, many large investor-owned utilities, and they're looking at their area and they're thinking, I need to think about enhancing that resiliency. How do I do that quickly, and how do I cover that?
Arvind Satyam, Pano AI, really appreciate you stopping by the Factor This interview studio.
Paul, this has been a fun discussion. I appreciate it.